I am joined by Representative-elect Kat Cammack of Florida's 3rd Congressional District. And for you viewers and listeners out there, Kat is going to talk about her background, what led her to run for office, some issues that are kind of on her mind, what she hopes to accomplish in Congress, and anything else, and especially about the whole incoming class of Republican women who are going to be historic in numbers going into the 117th Congress. So Kat, we are so delighted to have you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to chat with me about what's going on and what you look forward to doing coming to Washington, D.C.
No, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to join you and excited to get to work in the 117th Congress.
Excellent. Yeah, I've seen you plastered like everywhere. You've been making the rounds on media, and that's a really good sign because I think people will defer to you for a lot of interesting perspectives. But what led you to run for office in the first place? You're going to be the youngest Republican woman coming into the 117th Congress. What was the impetus behind running, and how did you best this kind of crop of different opponents in the primary, because you had a lot of opponents going into the general election. So talk about what led you to run, and then what was your process behind winning the primary?
Well, as you said, I came out of the largest primary field in the state of Florida, a 10-way primary. Originally started as a 12-person primary, and by the time it was all said and done, there was 10 of us left. So it definitely was a rough and tumble primary, I'll say. But it really has helped prepare me for what's to come next, which, is legislating in a very partisan, gridlocked Congress. And, I think back to the reason why I started this whole campaign and really my involvement in politics to begin with. And it started really when we lost our small cattle ranch out west due to an Obama era program. And it wasn't a program that any of us joined or signed up for. It was Obama's signature housing initiative, the HAMP program, in which any bank could take advantage of this legislation and would receive a tax credit for any home loan that they just, quote, couldn't save. And so millions of homeowners across the country lost their homes under this program, really through no fault of their own. And it has turned into one of the biggest scandals that no one talks about. There have been class action lawsuits and just another failure of big government, this one size fits all approach that big government tends to have across the board on all topics and all issues. And that is really what started my process for getting involved. At the time, I had just finished up college. It was 2011. And my family, we found ourselves homeless. We were staying in an extended stay motel that was a pay by the week type establishment. And I got a call from a family friend, and he said, my uncle is running for Congress in Florida, and we think you'd be a good fit for the campaign. And at that point in time, my whole life plan had been, hey, maybe I'll take over the family business, which was commercial sandblasting, which my mom was running the business, and maybe get involved in the energy industry. That was really where my passion lied. But when something as dramatic as losing your home, your childhood home, happens, you have to make a choice. You can either, put your head back in the sand and, continue on your merry way, or you decide that, I'm going to go after the thing that caused this traumatic event in my life and try to make it right. And so I decided that I was going to try to make it right. And that's how I ended up involved in politics. I joined the campaign of Representative Ted Yoho. And after we won our initial campaign against a 24-year incumbent, we made the choice that I was going to join the official office, and I've been serving this district in Florida for the last 8 years as the Deputy Chief of Staff, and now I will continue that service as the representative for this area, really taking the work that we've done for the last several years to the next level and elevating that work and the constituent work and issues. So I'm excited for that opportunity and the challenge that lies ahead.
Yeah, I remember reading that you were his deputy chief of staff before you decided to run for office. And a lot of people started to pay attention to your race as the summer heated up after you clinched the nomination. And I think you won quite overwhelmingly. Was it like an 8% difference? And what do you think resonated with the voters of Florida's 3rd district? Why do you think you were able to best your Democrat opponent by such a sizable margin?
In the general, we actually won by 14.5 points. I think when it's all said and done, it might be 15 at this point now that they've finished counting all the provisional ballots. But, with such a large margin, you're not just getting conservatives to support you, you're getting independents and moderates and some Democrats to support you. And I think it's because my message has always been, I'm a constitutional conservative that takes an oath to the Constitution, not to a party. And when you are a representative, you're a representative for every single one of your constituents. And in my case, here in the 3rd District, we have about 710,000 constituents. So regardless of whether they're Republican or Democrat or anywhere in between, when they come knocking on the door with any sort of issue or concern, we pick up the phone, we answer the call, we open the door. And my message has never been, vote for me because I'm a woman or vote for me because I'm young. It was, vote for me because I'm the best person for the job. I have a plan that is going to really help the folks in the 3rd District, whether it be through education, whether it be getting access to rural broadband, which is a top issue here in our district, fixing healthcare, really providing that critical infrastructure for our communities so that they can prosper and grow. These were just issues that weren't partisan in nature. I was talking with people about, this race and representing the district. Like I said, it was never a check the box mentality. It was always, this is my plan to serve everyone in the 3rd District. And I think that's really the attitude and mentality that you have to have as a representative. Sure, we all have our politics and our beliefs and our values, and I will always vote my values. But when I am really sitting down, talking to people about the issues that they care about most, I have to be an open book. And I think no matter at the end of the day, whether Republican or Democrat, that is what is going to be the difference maker in having someone be successful, because you can respectfully disagree. And I think that especially today, that has been lost, is the ability to respectfully disagree and, basically take your ball home and, you're not going to play in my sandbox anymore type attitude.
Yeah, you are coming into probably one of the most divided times in government. And it's really interesting because nobody expected Republicans to win. Like, I usually follow things very closely, and I expected, pretty good chances, but I didn't expect congressional Republican candidates to almost wall up Democrats politically and electorally speaking. And they almost retook the House, much to the chagrin of observers and prognosticators. What do you think went into that? Because do you think it was certain positions that Democrat candidates took? I know a lot of the moderates that were elected in 2018 lost their races going into 2020. And now it's obviously stacked with a very diverse, intellectually speaking, racially, everything. But even beyond that, I think people are now seeing that there are more diverse voices in the Republican Party going into this Congress. But what do you think went into this? Why do you think Republicans were entrusted with more congressional seats?
Well, I think there was a combination of factors. Obviously you see that there is a movement afoot in the Democrat Party to pull Democrats more to the left, to the hard left. And when you really talk about the November 3rd election, it's not so much, it was Biden versus Trump, or it was, a Republican versus Democrat. It was really America as we know it versus socialism. And overwhelmingly, people have said, I don't want to live in a socialist nation, or, if they were a veteran or come from a military family or any family that has a service member in them, whether they're, frontline hometown hero or military, they were saying, I never took an oath to defend socialism. I took an oath to defend our constitutional republic. And that message of the left is heading towards socialism and they believe that government is the answer, that really was in stark contrast to what the Republicans and those on the right were offering, which was, hey, we have solutions to these problems that have been plaguing our country for years and decades. We also want to make sure that you have the right to succeed and make choices for your family. And at the end of the day, the message was really simple. It was equal opportunity versus equal outcome. And I think people overwhelmingly, and this is really the spirit of America, that gritty, scrappy, get her done type attitude. We are all about equal opportunity. Everyone should have a fair shot at succeeding at whatever they want to do, but that whole concept of equal outcome, of redistribution of wealth, and this Medicare for all, and all these things where it's a one size fits all program for everyone, that is something that overwhelmingly has been rejected. And that is why you're seeing so many Republicans winning seats that no one anticipated them winning. And that is a sign, I think, of what's to come in 2022. I think you're going to see the Republicans take the House back. Americans are sick and tired of government telling them what to do. And, look at what's happened with COVID. We have an overwhelming sense, particularly in my area, that, listen, we're getting mixed messages on science and data. We're getting mixed messages from various levels of government. We're also seeing that outcomes in states that are completely locking down are not great in comparison to the states that are remaining open. There's just two sides to the story right now. And I think that that's not only contributing to the politicization of where we're at in DC, but I think you're seeing that people are starting to see it less Republican versus Democrat and more American versus socialism.
Yeah, I know socialism pretty well because my family fled it. And it's actually really exciting to see I think 2 or 3 who have directly experienced it. Carlos Jimenez of Florida. He was born in Cuba. And then Victoria Spartz, who was born in then Soviet-occupied Ukraine, the first person to be born in the Soviet Union to be elected to Congress. So I think it's going to be really interesting for people to listen to their perspectives about why that doesn't work, why that system has failed repeatedly whenever tried. And people say, well, Republicans use that talking point as a boogeyman to scare people, but I think it was effective because a lot of them were supporting outright, socialist or quasi-socialist or collectivist kind of government takeover policies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and in the state of Florida, we're no stranger to, Cubans and the Cuban community that has fled the dictatorship of the Castro regime, and we've also seen several Venezuelans flee Venezuela. They're seeing tremendous suffering in Venezuela. And here it's part of our community now because Florida is really the destination where so many of these communities find home after, being subjected to these murderous, suppressive dictatorships and essentially just tyranny. And so we're seeing firsthand in 2020 how socialism and communism fails the people. There's no reason why in 2020 people should be waiting in bread lines and there should be rations of food, and people are fighting in the street over basic goods in Venezuela. That's not something we should aspire to be. And for every person that tells me, well, it just hasn't worked there because they weren't wealthy enough, well, as an economics minor, I can tell you that there's no such thing as a free lunch, and eventually you run out of someone else's money. So it's all well and good in theory, but in practice, not so much. And I think capitalism has been really dismissed and really has been forgotten as truly the eradicator of poverty. When you look at historical data, the rise of capitalism and the Industrial Revolution really gave rise to lifting people out of poverty in a way that the globe had never seen before. And so we need to start talking about how capitalism can transform lives. And again, it goes back to that concept of equal opportunity, not equal outcome, because equal outcome is what the socialists and the communists want. And ultimately, it just enriches the rich and puts a very few amount of people at the top that are dictating to the rest of the masses, whereas capitalism is about that opportunity where everyone can succeed because the system is set up in a way that there's that safety net, yes, but there's also unlimited potential for anyone, no matter where they come from, to succeed. So that's what we're fighting for in this country. And again, you talked about Victoria Spartz and Carlos Jimenez, that both great stories and will be great messengers to share that. And as the youngest Republican woman coming into Congress, I think it's important that we start educating my generation and the one coming up right behind me, the Gen Zs, about the dangers of socialism. It's very easy to sit in a very comfortable air-conditioned room with your, iPhone and iPad and, very comfortable everyday comforts when you've never experienced true poverty. And I think that's something that we need to awaken this generation to, and I'll be a very vocal advocate as we begin that education process.
Yeah, and if you need any help, my family is just here in the Washington, D.C. area, happy to share their story of fleeing the Soviet Union too. So you have plenty of people to choose from, and I would be happy to volunteer my parents if you need any more firsthand testimonials too.
Absolutely.
Why don't we talk about some issues that are on your mind? How we first got connected, we have some mutual friends out of Florida in the water quality, kind of conservation, agriculture space, and I'm a little bit familiar with the issues that are down there. There's a lot with the Everglades. There's a lot of kind of tussling between agricultural interests and water quality interests. And some people think that those two factions have to be at odds with one another rather than coming together and finding solutions. So we often hear that farmers are pigeonholed and accused of all the different environmental problems. And then I know there's some other extenuating factors, but speak to kind of this conservationist mantra that I know you're very passionate about, having a background in cattle ranching and supporting agricultural interests. And something that I've talked about at length is kind of the need for more conservative conservationists. Do you think of yourself as that? Do you want to promote those issues? And do you hope to be in certain committees where you can talk about these issues in a greater capacity?
Absolutely. I think growing up on a small cattle ranch, you have an appreciation for the resources and being a good steward of the land that folks who grow up in maybe the cities or urban areas or the suburbs don't really understand. And I don't think there's any greater steward of our natural resources than our farmers and ranchers. I cringe every time I see someone attack our agricultural community as saying, you're anti-environment or you're polluting the environment. That doesn't make any sense from an economic standpoint, from really any standpoint. It's very disheartening to see that we've let this narrative go for so long, to the point where folks who have no working knowledge of agriculture are making decisions that significantly impact our farmers and ranchers and how they operate. And I would say that as someone who has been an avid angler, someone who has grown up in the agriculture community, it's important that we have an active voice, but also a young voice that is standing up to this narrative that the left are truly the champions of sound environmental policy. I think that's a misnomer, that you have to have some very strict, over-regulated environments in order to have sound environmental policy. You have to have a sound economic policy in concert with a sound environmental policy. The two have to coexist in harmony, otherwise neither will work. That just is a common sense that's just a common sense approach to the whole argument about environmental policy. And as we all know, and common sense isn't common, and often it gets pretty politicized. But I think as we go forward and we talk about environmental policy, and of course there's a lot of fear across the country in the ag community about what might happen under a Biden administration. I think what we've seen previously, say in the Obama administration, were these ridiculous regulations and these rules that were really burdensome, costly, and pushing out the family farms, and ultimately setting the stage for really the final crop, which would be housing developments. And there's nothing environmentally friendly about putting a slab of concrete down and installing a septic tank and calling it a day. So there's definitely a discussion that we need to be having. I am right now in the process of working very hard to get on the ag committee and earning a seat there. And that's where I really think that I'll be able to be a champion and an advocate for rural America, because again, rural America is really not just our heritage, but I also think our future. we have an opportunity to really support our farmers and ranchers in a way that we haven't seen in years. And that's through rolling back these crazy regulations that make no sense, that don't make the environment safer, they don't make food production safer, they don't make labor safer. It's just a regulation for the sake of a regulation. And so I'm looking forward to being that advocate. But again, I think it comes down to messaging and marketing. We have to be that voice that's willing to stand up and say, no, conservatives are actually great conservationists, and it's right in our name. We are conservative. We don't spend money on products and fertilizers if we don't need to. We use the bare minimum amount to safely produce enough food to support our communities and our states and ultimately the nation and the world. But when it comes to our natural resources, we are the best stewards of them. And so there's a longevity argument that we have that I think that the left doesn't. And so we're going to be talking about that at length, not just in committee, but I hope on a national stage, so that we can really start pushing back on this, the stereotype that the left has a stranglehold on the environment and being strong conservators of the environment. So looking forward to doing that.
Yeah, and if any of your other colleagues want to come on and I don't have a connection to them, please send them my way, because I know there are a lot of passionate. There should be more hunters and anglers in the caucus. So if you want to, vent about why they feel like they're underheard and underrepresented, more than happy to give them a platform through the podcast.
Absolutely.
But yeah, speak to briefly about hunters and anglers too, because you were saying that you do a lot of fishing. Do you think that their voice is going to be shut out? I've been looking into certain things. It's not really in the Biden doctrine quite yet, but certain other groups like Aspen Institute, and I heard Senator Heinrich say they want to move away public lands management from the multiple use stewardship model to a public use, which would exclude the people who not only recreate on those lands, but also make a profit or make their livelihood off of it, which has been kind of the gold standard. So if you were to see something like that, how would you respond? And do you think the Republican caucus will respond in some form if we see that shift away from this successful kind of conservation model on public lands?
Oh, absolutely. I think you would see the Republican caucus come together as a whole and really push back on that, and again, in Washington, I don't know what happens when you start breathing that DC air, but all of a sudden people feel the urge to fix something that isn't broken. And you hit on it, really a gold standard of conservation and how anglers and hunters have really supported these ecosystems and these systems for so long. I find it very interesting that people who don't engage in the sport or in the industry want to make rules and regulations, which we tend to find in all parts of government. But of course, I think you'll see conservatives really rally together, be one team, one mission, and pushing back on that. I do really worry for my friends out west, particularly with land management issues, where that is a huge issue. I've already started having those discussions with some of my colleagues like Yvette Harrell and Lauren Boebert from New Mexico and Colorado, respectively. And they've definitely got their hands full, and they're going to have some backup with some friends from the eastern part of the country. But I think that there's just, again, an education that needs to happen. We have ceded this narrative and really the entire topic to the left, and so they've really been able to craft and drive whatever they would like. And unfortunately, so many people and groups have taken this narrative as fact, when in reality, if you look at data, if you talk with people that are involved, like Mike Elf, you will find that it's actually the contrary of what they're pushing. So I'm confident that as a whole, the coalition and the conference will push back on any movement like that. I think they really, truly will have, in their eyes, bigger fish to fry in pushing for the Green New Deal through the Natural Resources Committee and through the agencies. But we'll be keeping an eye out for sure.
Are there any other issues that are going to be interesting to you going into this new session of Congress and navigating the halls of Congress? Anything else that you want to specialize in and focus on before I direct our viewers and listeners to connect with you?
Of course, every member has a million different things that they want to work on. For me, rural broadband is critical. I think rural broadband is going to be likened to what happened in the 1920s and 30s when rural America was electrified. There's just such an important role that broadband has to play, whether it be through commerce or healthcare or education. And especially in the COVID era, we're seeing how important it is to have access to high-speed internet. And particularly for ag, you know, we're really getting into this new age of agriculture that is very data-driven, science-driven, and we're using technology to be better stewards of the environment, and broadband has a major role to play in that. So rural broadband, hands down, is my top priority. I want to create the blueprint on how to deliver and deploy broadband to every congressional district in the country. And beyond that, I definitely am looking forward to working on issues like fixing our guest worker problem that we have here in the country, but also looking at issues under Homeland in securing our borders and really preparing for the next crisis or challenge that our country will face, whether it be a natural disaster or if it be something man-made. And so I think finding my home in both the agricultural community and the homeland community is where I'm going to be focusing the majority of my time. And then, of course, back here at home, since we're only given 101 days in Washington, I'll have a lot of time to spend back home in serving my constituents and helping them navigate the labyrinth that is Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I think the trouble with a lot of new members in the past is that they go to Washington. You see this even among some of our fellow conservatives. They go there, they see bright, shiny lights, they get suckered, and they lose their core. And I think this new crop of conservatives, yourself included, are principled, but you can electrify and communicate, I think, in a better perspective. And I think you're trying to give us a little bit of hope, and you seem kind of hopeful that you can help kind of change what's going on there in a measured, respectable tone, and even, I guess, appeal to different constituencies, politically speaking, because we do have to expand the coalition. That's largely been a discussion. I know President Trump did in this recent election, to much of the chagrin of political observers. He did make a lot of inroads with different minority communities, and especially the Hispanic community. And I think people are going to be looking for a new political home where they're not going to feel pigeonholed or excoriated for deviating from, let's say, the Democrat Party or some other group out there. But Kat, where could people connect with you and learn more about you and follow your journey into Congress?
Well, I appreciate the time and you having me on today. It certainly is an awesome opportunity to get our message out. I encourage people to check us out. Website is catforcongress.com. And I encourage you to follow us on social media. One thing, as the youngest Republican woman in the country, I've made a pledge to really own social media and share my journey, especially the behind the scenes, with all of our supporters and followers. So whether it is on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, please follow us. It's just Kat Cammack, Cammack. You can check out all the work that we've been doing, both here in Florida and in Washington, D.C. It's a nice mix of, you know, here's the behind the scenes look at what happens during freshman orientation, along with some of the policy work that we're doing right now. So follow us on social media. That's the best way to stay in touch. And thank you so much for the opportunity today.